The senators remain in D.C. A coronavirus relief bill is back on the table. Some people want to spend $1 trillion. Some people want to spend $3 trillion. I'm sure by the time this is all over, we'll be up 10, 11, however many trillion. Well, everybody is here trying to spend money. Nobody's pocketbook is safe. We will get into the specifics of each bill being proposed. This is Verdict with Ted Cruz. Welcome back to Verdict with Ted Cruz. I'm Michael Knowles. And I got to tell you, Senator, we're going to be talking about a lot of big numbers today. But beyond legislation, there's a really big number on this show. We're now north of 14 million downloads. And beyond that, we have 4.7 out of 5-star reviews. That's our average rating. And I got to tell you, usually for political shows, the lefties come in and they spam you with 1-star reviews. So that is pretty good.
So do you think the folks watching this one could up that to 4.8?
You know, it would help if you could just go leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, wherever you're at. That would be terrific. You can also obviously find us on YouTube, all over the place. We'll send you an audio cassette on a carrier pigeon if you like. Thank you so much to everybody who's
we don't have audio cassettes.
We don't have the 8-track?
There are no audio cassettes.
I'm so conservative. I'm really looking back in time. Well,
we are writing it with a quill pen, though.
every episode.
Do you know, by the way, that every time you argue a Supreme Court case, the U.S. Supreme Court, you get not one but 2 quill pens?
What?
They give the advocates 2 quill pens.
That seems like wasteful government spending, but it's very cool.
On my desk in the Senate office is a cup holder filled with quill pens from arguments I've done.
Yeah, you've argued a number of these. I've got to go and see these quills at some point.
And by the way, you know what you can do with a quill pen?
What can you do?
You can hit subscribe on YouTube. It may not work.
I don't know if that,
it'd be worth trying. You could poke at it.
We don't want any liability here for damage to your computer screen, but we do want you to subscribe. So go on and ring that bell, and hopefully we'll bring that number north of 15 million or 16 million, or maybe north of 3 trillion as we talk about this coronavirus spending. I would like to pivot a moment to something that I know is on everybody else's mind as well. The fact that you are still in D.C. It is, I think, not something that senators are very happy about, because the senators are supposed to be home on vacation right now, but you're all still in town.
Well, actually, not quite yet. So we were supposed to be here anyway. So this week was scheduled to be the last week of session.
And then you go into vacation.
And then, so actually, vacation's not the right phrase for it. So to be fair, look, now, nobody accuses politicians of working too much, but I will say the usual schedule of the Senate, in any given week, any given month, is typically you have 3 weeks in session and 1 week that it's called the state work period, where you're back in the state. Yeah. But if you're doing your job, you're on the road, you're traveling. A state like Texas, you're traveling all over the place. Yeah. So it when you're not in session, you're still working.
Yeah, it's not exactly relaxing to be going all over the state.
But for the month of August, typically there are 5 weeks where you're not in session, and you plan all sorts of different. You plan trips, you plan events, you plan all sorts of things. Now, in COVID, it's a little weird because scheduling anything is difficult. One of the strange things about the Senate, so we don't know if there's going to be a deal between the House and Senate. We don't know what's going to happen.
This is specifically on a COVID stimulus relief package.
And so at this point, I think probably what will happen is most senators will go back to their states next week.
Okay.
And what leadership has said is, well, if there's a deal cut, we'll give you 24 hours notice and you come back.
You got to come back.
And it's...
So where does that stand? Because I know there have been a lot of deals on the table. Nancy Pelosi had one, then Mitch McConnell had one, then some Senate Republicans have disagreed with the Republican plan. So
who would do that?
I can't imagine.
What kind of rabble-rousers? Are you
some guy from Texas?
There you go.
I would never. What is, even before we get into the merits of it, just what is in those different plans?
All right, so Nancy Pelosi's is the biggest, and it's a bill that the House passed a couple of months ago, and it's over $3 trillion, about $3.4 trillion.
What's $3 trillion between friends?
Look, even in federal government terms, that is a crap ton of money.
Yeah.
That was a bill, frankly, that she didn't negotiate with senators. She didn't talk to Republicans. She just passed it on a party line vote. And it's basically every gift she can give to her party's supporters. It's intended to be a campaign document.
I mean, I saw one story that she had a handout to the marijuana industry to help cure COVID.
So the word marijuana appears more frequently in the Nancy Pelosi bill than does the word jobs. Look, it's and I guess if you're high enough, you don't notice that you're unemployed and broke.
Who cares?
I mean, that there is a certain kind of Nancy Pelosi sense to it.
Yeah, that's right.
It is. So that's one bill, is the House version.
Doesn't sound great.
The Senate version that was drafted by Senate Republican leadership is only $1 trillion. So it's really a bargain.
It's a steal.
I mean, and unfortunately, it has many of the same elements. It doesn't have all of the, I mean, look, they threw into the Nancy Pelosi bill voting by mail. They threw all these priorities that have nothing to do with coronavirus, but they figured, all right, let's make all our special interest happy. The Senate version spends $1 trillion. So it sends everyone a $1,200 check again, does that again. It re-ups the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, so it spends more on that.
This is basically for businesses to keep people employed.
It sends about $100 billion to schools. Now, mind you, many of the schools that are saying they're not going to open, so it's not clear what they need $100 billion to not teach our kids.
Well, but the teachers' unions still need money.
And so there's all these different pockets of money, and right now there are a couple of areas of disagreement. One is just price tag, the difference between $1 trillion and $3.4 trillion. I've joked they're going to compromise and spend $5.
Yeah,
like that.
Right. So is there an alternative to these?
Well, as it so happens, I rolled one out today, and at the Senate lunch today, I addressed my Republican colleagues and I said, look, my principal criticism with both the Pelosi bill and the McConnell bill, it's not just the price tag. I think the price tag's too much, but it's a more fundamental concern, which is neither of these bills are focused on jobs.
Yeah.
We've seen 51 million Americans lose their jobs in the last 4 months. I mean, you and I, in our lifetimes, that's never happened. Last time we've had numbers like that were the Great Depression. Yeah.
That number is so huge. And every week it's ticked up from 20 to 30 to 51 million American workers.
It's staggering. And so the most problematic aspect of the CARES Act, and I voted for the CARES Act. It was 96-0 in the Senate. So every Republican, every Democrat supported it. I supported it. Bernie Sanders supported it.
CARES Act is the first relief bill.
It's the first big one. There were a couple of smaller ones, but the CARES Act was a big bill. It had lots of elements, some that were pretty good, some that were not. The worst element was concerning unemployment compensation. There is a federal plus-up of $600 a week. Now, what does that mean? So we've had an unemployment compensation system for a long time, where if you lose your job, you can file for unemployment, and you get a percentage of your wages typically, and it's administered at the state level.
So you don't get 100% of your wages.
You typically get a much smaller percentage. So it's designed to help you make ends meet, but not be comfortable. But it's not designed to be a permanent situation. Well, in the CARES Act, federal government plus that up $600 a week. Here in the state of Texas, let me give you some specifics. Used to be the maximum under unemployment was $521 a week.
Yeah.
Add 600 new federal dollars, that takes it from $521 to $1,121 a week. Now, $1,121 a week, that works out to about $58,000 a year. That's about $28 an hour. Now, look, if you're a doctor, if you're making $100 an hour, $28 an hour is not deeply attractive. But if you're working in an hourly job, if you're working at a movie theater, if you work at a bowling alley, if you're a waiter or a waitress and you're making $9, $10, $11 an hour, suddenly the government is paying you more, and in a lot of instances, a lot more, not to work than to work.
So why do they put that in the bill? It seems to me they put that in the bill. I don't think it's a coincidence that it's an election year.
So, look, shoveling money out of Washington is something the Democrats are good at.
Right.
And in this instance, I think it's the most cynical portion. So in the Nancy Pelosi version, it just continues that $600 plus up.
Okay.
Just keeps going and going and going. And there's a reason for that. I think Pelosi and Schumer have decided that the way they win in November is if 51 million people are still unemployed. That their objective is shut the entire country down, shut every business down, shut every school down, and have everyone sitting at home alone and broke and unemployed and pissed off and depressed and pessimistic about the future. And I think they think, bingo, Joe Biden wins if that happens. And so every bit of the Democratic bill is designed to make sure nobody goes back to work. They don't want anyone to go back to work. Now, the stupid thing about the Republican bill is it has the same ideas. It just spends less money. I mean, we basically take Pelosi's agenda and say, well, we're going to be cheaper. We'll do the same things.
Right. We just won't fund it as well.
But, and I urged Republican senators today, I said, look, in a battle to be Santa Claus, the Dems will always outbid us. There's no limit to how much money they will borrow and try to give away. So here's what we ought to do instead. Is we ought to bring jobs back.
Simple
which
enough.
means we ought to be cutting taxes, cutting regulations from small businesses. Millions of small businesses shut down during this crisis. A lot of them are just starting to open, but they don't know if they're going to survive. They're scared. We ought to be cutting taxes, cutting regulations so that those small businesses can open and they can rehire their employees and they can survive. So I introduced a bill called the Recovery Act. And it is focused, instead of just spending cash, it's focused on reducing taxes and reducing regulations to get people back at work. So what are some of the elements of the Recovery Act? Eliminating the payroll tax for the rest of the year. That has an immediate effect of giving every worker in America a raise. Right now, in your next paycheck, you get a raise.
And it's not that it only gives the workers a raise. It also incentivizes the employers who pay part of that to rehire their workers.
So half the payroll tax is paid by the employer, half is paid by the employee. So it makes it less expensive for employers to have employees. And the employees get a raise. And that is an incentive then for people to go work. It's an incentive for small businesses to hire employees. But not only that, the Recovery Act also says for the next $10,000 you earn this year, it's totally tax-free, no federal income tax. Again, it's about a marginal incentive. If you look at economics, you look at basic principles of economics, what matters are the marginal incentives. The incentives on, if you do X, what is your reward or your detriment?
Okay. And it's funny because it's a technical point you're making. So I want to make sure we're getting it right because it seems so simple. You know, in the Democrat bill, or I guess even in the Republican leadership bill, it's just about tossing money out. Whereas here, it's very simple, just on the margins. If you want to see an action, you need to incentivize that action.
If you want more work, if you want more jobs, you want to incentivize more work and more jobs, make it more profitable for employees and for employers to have more work and more jobs. And look, I've said a bunch of times, you know the little book, Everything We Need to Know in Life we learned in kindergarten? We know that. We know that at our home or with our family, if you want your kids to do the dishes, you say, I'll give you $5 to do the dishes. Like that. We
or you
understand
get to eat more
that.
candy, or you get to stay
whatever.
up late,
I mean, it's whether it's carrot or stick.
Right.
What the Democrats are doing is incentivizing not working. And to give you, I mean, the stats are amazing. Right now, 68% of the people receiving these unemployment benefits are making more from unemployment than they were making in their jobs. 20% are making twice as much. And, you know, when we passed the CARES Act, we actually had a Republican amendment at the time, very reasonable common sense amendment that said simply capped unemployment benefits at whatever you were making. Just said you shouldn't make more on unemployment. It shouldn't be more profitable than working.
Right.
Even that has significant disincentives to work. But we said, okay, look, at a basic minimum, let's not pay people more not to work.
To sit at home.
We had a big debate on the Senate floor. So Dick Durbin, who's really one of the smartest and most capable Democrats,
Okay.
He is a worthy adversary, and he and I have debated many issues many times. He's on Senate Judiciary with me, and we go round and round a lot. In fact,
that's interesting because I pay attention to the Republican senators much more than to the Democrats. There are some who seem not particularly impressive. You're saying Dick Durbin is one of the more
Durbin's
impressive.
A smart guy, and one of the things that he's good at is he sounds quite reasonable. He doesn't sound as shrill as some of his colleagues. He is, but he doesn't sound it, and that makes him more effective. So he was down there, and I was making this argument on the Senate floor, and he came back, and he said, that just shows the problem with Cruz. Cruz thinks that the people who've lost their jobs are lazy jerks that just want to sit on the sofa and don't want to work. And he's insulting every person who's lost their job in this crisis.
Is that what you said? I must have missed that.
Well, and it actually was a great illustration of the argument back and forth of a lot of the differences between Democrats and Republicans, because Durbin was doing what demagogues do often, which is turning it into a morality play, where you're saying that these people are bad and evil and shiftless. And I actually got up and responded. I said, no, I'm actually saying exactly the opposite, which is people are rational.
Yeah.
And they respond to incentives. And we need to think about what those incentives are. And I said, you know what? You're a single mom, and let's say you're waiting tables, and suddenly the government pays you twice as much money to stay home. You love your kids, so you're going to respond to that incentive. Of course you are. And it's not that you're lazy. It's like if you tell anyone I'm going to pay you twice as much to do X than Y, most people will say, all right, I'll do X.
Yeah.
But that's not helping those individuals. It's not helping the small business. It's not helping the economy. But I think Pelosi and Schumer are fine with that because they don't want anyone to work right now. They want everything shut down.
Right.
I want to mention a couple of other elements in the Recovery Act that are important. Health savings accounts.
Oh, great.
So really important part of healthcare reform, tax-advantaged account that you could save to pay healthcare costs. Here's the problem. Federal law makes it illegal for anyone to have a health savings account unless they have a high deductible insurance policy, and most people don't.
Okay.
So the overwhelming majority of Americans are not allowed to have health savings accounts. So one of the things I have in the Recovery Act, every American can have a health savings account. And that lets you, look, it's a time of pandemic. People are worried about health care for their family. It lets them save for health care in a way that is tax advantaged to meet their needs.
I have a health savings account. I love it. It's great.
Most Americans are not allowed to, and we can change that.
Yeah.
School choice, as you know, I'm passionate about it. I have legislation that provides that you get a federal tax credit for contributions to scholarship granting organizations in K through 12 education.
Yeah.
Massively expands choice for parents, particularly for parents. Like if you're sitting there and your school is not teaching, you ought to have the choices to find something else to teach your kids.
Right.
These are policies that are pro-growth, pro-jobs, that are consistent with conservative principles. And actually, to be fair, the school choice proposal that I have is right now in Mitch McConnell's bill. So that's an element. He took my legislation and included it. Now, I'll confess, I'm quite worried. The teachers' unions hate my bill. So I'm quite worried that the Democrats, if there is a deal, will say hell no, and that leadership will negotiate it away, that it's basically trade bait. So they're including it, but they aren't going to fight for it.
Right.
So, but that would be a very important reform.
Right. Even the fact that exists, right? There are provisions of these bills that are just there to use as leverage when you're negotiating with the other side.
Sometimes, certainly.
Yeah. So you'll either go home or you'll stick around here, but eventually the Senate will have to come in and vote on this, and we'll see what's in the final package.
Well, maybe there may not be a deal.
Really?
I don't know. I'm not convinced Nancy Pelosi wants a deal. I think they've made the decision. They may have made the decision, do no deal, insists on give us everything, even as bad as Republicans are, like surrendering 100% is too big an ask. And I think the Democrats may have made the political judgment, we'll blame it all on them.
We'll make it really tough until the election for the country.
And then they think they're going to win if that's the case. If everyone is at home and broke, that's how you have a terrible election. And what I'm urging the president, what I'm urging Republicans is, look, I get why Nancy Pelosi wants that.
Yeah.
I understand the political self-interest. It's cynical. It hurts millions of Americans, but I understand why she's doing it. Why would Republicans be complicit in that, though? Like are we?
Doesn't help Republicans.
Are we lemmings? Are we all rushing off the same cliff, going, yes, please let's crash on the rocks below. What's up with that?
Well, unfortunately, I think certainly for some people that's exactly what they're doing.
But by the way, did you ever read Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
I actually never have, albeit a classic.
All right, just for the record, that makes me far geekier than you.
I wasn't going to say it.
But okay, so it's three series. The second one is Restaurant at the End of the Universe.
Yeah.
And there is a scene when, if I'm remembering right, although I haven't read this in 30 years, but if I'm remembering right, there's a scene where they're sitting at the restaurant and up to the table walks a creature that identifies this creature has been bred with something that talks and a cow and a lemming. So it's able to speak and it's suicidal. And it walks up and says, so I'm for dinner tonight. And let me tell you, my hindquarters are very, very tender. And I've been, and like your dinner discusses with you which portion of the dinner to be served. And so it's just with the lemming example.
That's an image of the Republican Party, perhaps, sometimes.
It's a little bit, we're walking up going, okay, so which,
Yeah, here's where you should go after us. That's sad, but unfortunately, I think it's true.
And by the way, comedy is incredibly potent. Especially because the left has destroyed comedy.
Yeah, right.
Like you and I were talking last night. I love Saturday Night Live. I grew up watching Saturday Night Live.
Oh, yeah. There are some great eras of that show.
It is. Have you watched young Eddie Murphy on Saturday Night Live?
Terrific.
When he's like 19 years old and just such a talent.
Yeah.
And by the way, SNL on comedy has been spectacular, but it's not funny anymore.
Yeah.
Because their only script is we hate Donald Trump. Yeah. It's just it's a screed, and it's like, okay, fine. Look, are there jokes to tell about Donald Trump? Sure.
One or two, yeah.
But when it all just becomes rage.
Yeah. Or, after Hillary lost, they had that nauseating sketch where they're playing Hallelujah on the piano.
And just crying. And it was...
Where's the humor coming in? I don't...
You look at the late night hosts. I loved listening to Johnny Carson and Leno and actually I like jokes at my expense. I laugh at them. The late night hosts are not. The one exception I would say is Jimmy Fallon. Jimmy Fallon tries to be more even-handed.
He's a little more old school about the job.
But Colbert is just a
unwatchable. Yeah.
It is liberal id.
Yeah.
Raging, and how about just be funny again? So what that means, though, is there's a huge space for humor that's not Marxist. Like, that's just not woke.
Yeah. On the topic of humor, we got a compliment from RD, who says, first of all, both of your timely humor has gotten me through the insanity of 2020. Thank you, RD. Appreciate it. Seriously, it's the best.
You need to work on your timeliness there.
I know. That was not timely. That was not at all time. When Trump wins. I like the confidence there. When Trump wins. Do you see absolute chaos in the big cities occurring again? Is anyone preparing? I have guns. Don't worry about me. Just don't like seeing America burn.
There's a Freudian concept of projection. That what you're doing, you accuse others of doing. Have you noticed all the Dems and all the media saying, what if Trump doesn't accept the results of the election?
I have noticed that.
They still haven't admitted who won 2016.
They haven't admitted who won 2000, for that matter.
Well, there is that. And by the way, Stacey Abrams is a damn fine governor of Georgia.
She's doing a great job.
Like, they're literally in just this alternative reality where it... Did you see, what was it? There was so I only read the headline, so I may get the details wrong, but it's close enough for government work.
Yeah.
I guess they were doing political war games where they had John Podesta, who was the chairman of Hillary's campaign.
This was in the New York Times.
Who was playing Joe Biden. And in the war game, refused to accept the outcome of the election. And they had them, like, what was it, California, Oregon, and Washington seceding from the Union because Biden lost.
Well, when they introduced this scenario, which, who am I to doubt the mainstream media? They said John Podesta, they expected in this war game for him to concede on election night, just as he did in 2016 on behalf of Hillary. But he didn't. People forget this. He didn't concede on election night on behalf of Hillary. He came out and he said, we'll wait to see what the results are. And frankly,
by the way, why didn't Hillary speak that night?
I think she was probably a little upset in whatever hotel room she was waiting in.
Do you know of any other campaign where the candidate doesn't speak? Where you send out, I mean, that's weird. Let me just, like, for the record.
John Podesta's exact words were, Hillary's here. She thanks you so much for being here for her because she's always here for you. And my thought at the time, I said, except right now when it's most important for her to show up on stage, she refused to do it. Where was she?
Listen, I have been in campaigns where I won. I've been in campaigns where I lost. By the way, winning is much better.
I've heard that.
Not even close. But, in every instance on election night, you come out and talk to the people. Like that's a pretty basic, like, social compact. But so if Trump wins re-election, which I hope he will, I think he will, but I think it's very volatile. Mm-hmm. I'm worried about this election.
I agree.
If Trump wins re-election, I think the left will go in paroxysms of part of how they've rationalized the last 3.5 years is they view it as a crazy fluke.
Yeah.
And they're resolved never to let it again. But their rage, I think they lose their minds.
Yeah.
If he wins. And do you see more violence from them? Probably. We're seeing violence now.
Yeah. I see it as an implicit threat when you have very prominent Democratic politicians, including Joe Biden, who have said, we can't take 4 more years of this. They're referring to the left-wing violence in the streets. That sounds a little bit like a threat to me.
There's reason to be worried.
There's reason to be worried. I was hoping you'd make us feel so much better about it. But the reality of it is there's reason to be worried.
And here's the reason to feel better.
Yeah.
Truth prevails over time. Right. I am an optimist through and through, and I believe that. You and I, a couple of weeks ago, were out in L.A., and we did a bunch of pods and radio shows. Yeah. One of the most interesting is you and I together did Dennis Prager's show. Yeah. Now Dennis is so brilliant. He's so encyclopedic. I got to say, by the way, as an interesting observation, doing the podcast has spoiled me.
Yes, I know.
Because the radio format, you had just these little snippets of 4 or 5 minutes, and then you broke for a commercial. And I was like, what do you mean
for 5 or 6 minutes of commercial? And then it goes, yes,
but it was just...
you can't get into it as much.
And I've done a ton of radio before, and I had never really noticed it until we've done podcasts where if you don't talk about an issue, you talk about an issue.
Yeah.
But Dennis and I think the world of Dennis, but we had actually a substantive disagreement. Yeah. Where I made a reference, I said, I agree with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that the arc of history bends towards justice.
Yeah.
And Dennis said, well, I don't think that at all. Actually, hold on. Michael does a great Dennis Prager impression. So give me Dennis.
Now, Senator, I hear you, but I disagree. I do not believe the arc of history bends toward justice.
That's strong.
I need a little more size, a little more height.
So he said, and he came back and he said, well, where was the arc of history in 1939 Germany?
Yeah.
And he said, where was the arc of history in the Soviet gulags?
Yeah.
And I actually came back. He had said earlier in the interview, he said, well, Ted, disagree with me if you want to. And I said, well, actually, Dennis, I'm going to come disagree with you on that.
Yeah.
You asked where was the arc of history in 1939 Germany? It was on those stark cliffs when our boys scaled the impossible heights and led the world in defeating the Nazi menace and freeing the globe from that evil. Where was the arc of history in Solzhenitsyn's gulag, in the hellhole that was there? It was standing before the Brandenburg Gate when Ronald Reagan said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Yeah.
And I believe, look, truth doesn't win every skirmish. It doesn't win every battle. It doesn't guarantee the result in this election.
Yeah.
And if Biden and Schumer and Pelosi win this election, we will go through a dark couple of years of some terrible policies.
Yeah.
But I believe over time, truth prevails.
Yeah.
And so that's a reason to be optimistic.
And there is, just in a very basic Christian sense, there is a happy ending to this story. Trouble is, things can get very dark before you arrive at that happy ending, but I suppose we'll just have to wait and see in the meantime. Senator, that's all the time we have. I'm Michael Knowles. This is Verdict with Ted Cruz.